I spoke about death contemplation and how it could enwisen you to a high degree. It'll basically deepen your consciousness because, as they say in these texts on the embryonic breathing, they talk about how life comes from death and life is the source of death. Well, what do they mean by that is basically what I was saying, the original condition, you were non-existent in the sense of no body mind. And that's what deep meditation and samadhi and enlightenment is supposed to get you to realize. It's essentially dreamless sleep. But when you do it with the breathing practices, clearing the channels, you actually gain the powers. You actually can gain some of the powers, but most importantly, you gain that deep insight that is above and beyond this transient scenario, this experience, which is actually so simple to figure out. And this is why they say people are bewildered animals, basically, because people keep asking, what's the point of life? Is it not obvious what life is about? I mentioned the basic functions. There's no life without psychophysical organisms because that's what you know of as life. The gift of life to you is the regeneration of psychophysical organisms that are, of course, hungry and craving, and constant need and craving, always needing each other, and they reproduce, they replicate. So they can't do this without eating each other or other things. So even when you talk about eating plants and vegetables, that counts also as eating life. So I'm not excusing that when I talk about people eating flesh. Same thing, we get it. It's all the same because in truth, that apple did generate of its own accord, or the orange or whatever. And of course, you are required to eat it. In a sense, I mean, if you get hungry, nobody's going to sit at an orange tree and starve. No normal human will sit under a tree with oranges and starve. Now, on the contrary, a sage would. And that's what you see when you see those pictures of those sages, those emaciated meditators. That's what you're looking at. But I'll get into that because we talk about again, life comes from death. So that implied no body mind. Before the generation of sperm and egg, the embryo, there was no body and mind. So there was basically what you would call eternity from your perspective of your mind body is nothingness because you can't classify it. That's why they call it nothingness. But if you want to know what it's like, it's dreamless sleep. There's no consciousness of body and mind. And of course, as they say, sleep is the cousin to death. That's a statement. People say that. Well, that's really what it means. Actually, dreamless sleep is no different from what you know of as death. Now, the truly enlightened, those with their chakras open, as everyone talks about, or their chi channels or whatever, their third eye, they actually, even in the waking state, they don't have these thoughts that we have that, go from moment to moment. These emotions that bounce in and out, hate, anger, they don't even have lust. So they've transcended all of the emotions essentially, basically to a point where it's minuscule, but the body and mind is there, but it's not there, of course. And that would be enlightenment as far as in the waking state. But they can actually enter what's called samadhi, which is the state of non-perception. They would say no perception, no not perception. And they would also say non-being and not non-being. And essentially what they mean by that is that what I call non-being is actually considered to be a being, because again, if this life is rooted in what you call death, then what you call death must be greater than life. So it's not to say it's not a being and this is a being as a being would be valuable, because of course beingness is valueless. That's the trick. Non-being, what you call non-being, which they would say is actually not non-being either, is actually the only value because this originated in that. So this can't have more value. This comes and goes from that. So that's actually the more full and potent state, and actually the auspicious state. So you come to regard, if you really want to be conscious and spiritual or whatever, you need to regard the condition of no body and no mind as auspicious, as a greater advantage than the condition of transient body, transient mind, terminal body, terminal mind. Every deficient body, every deficient mind, every deficient heart, basically. And that's why you seek out attachments to other people. You're deficient in so many ways. Even when it comes to all types of craving and lust, it's a deficiency. I need this. You're always in the negative. So you're basically, again, you're looked at as valueless. You are merely always seeking the 0 point. Now, some would say there actually exists a 1. The only 1 would be sexual orgasm, because that's the highest pleasure of a beast, any beast. And so you would have to put that in its perspective, of course, because it's a transient sensation. It's a transient experience. But essentially, that only serves the purpose, ultimately, of regenerating more of these creatures who exist in the ever negative state, always trying to seek the 0 point. Again, it's valueless. So that can't be looked upon necessarily as something that would offset the wretchedness of the condition in of itself, which again is the constant scurrying for 0 point, satiation. And of course, that's what you see every day. When everybody gets up in the morning, they're seeking that 0 point again, because you're back in the negative again, because being is actually the valueless. The source of being is actually valuable, but it's a little more complex than that, because the direct source of being is also valueless. And the source of that source would be the valuable, because the source of, again, of these energies, of course, that spawn these forms and these creatures, these miserable, terrible constructions of creatures, whatever energy generated that is really maleficent and deficient at heart. It's sick. It's actually considered to be an illness. This entire creaturely formation is considered to be a sickness. It's like a tumor. It's a starving, craving tumor that eventually bursts. And that's what you see when you look at a corpse or anything. You're looking at the results of the birth. Everybody's body, even someone who dies peacefully, will eventually swell up and burst and get eaten. That's the natural course. So that's its nature. It's actually a sickness when you really look at it. So from the that primordial perspective, it's a sickness. It's a transient, disposable sickness. And that's how they speak about it. If you understand that the source of your being or creaturely existence is actually more potent than its transient and temporal product, then you would come to understand the true knowledge, because that does transform your consciousness. It'll root your consciousness in something deeper, and then you'll get even deeper insights. It's just a different frequency to be on once you understand this. And also because half of your anxieties are based on this clinging to a body mind. It's based on this erroneous belief that the body mind is the auspicious condition, when it simply can't be. Because truthfully, if anyone is in existence, this means that they are being slowly kicked out of existence. There can be no one in existence that's not at the same time being kicked out of it. So actually, it's not even genuine to say or to even compare the two states. That's why this state will be looked at as an illusion and worthless. You can't compare it, because if you're pro-life, you're pro-dying. Anyone who's alive has to die. Now, they're not dead, but they have to die. Now, if you're pro-death, nobody has to die. That's the noble and wise reason when it comes to this condition, this state. And that's the type of insight that you would automatically have intuitively. Now, I'm just giving you guys some of the insight of these enlightening, because I know most of us, we won't get to that stage. Trust me, it's very deep and long, but just give you clues on what they're really talking about, because people are just so fluffy and corny, and they're so pro-life. Again, they're so pro having to die, because they're blind and not really conscious, that they miss the simple point in all of these teachings. So again, you do have to realize that the what they call non-being simply, but then again, it's not non-being, because it's more potent than the being that has to die. That scenario, that repetitive, redundant scenario, then you understand that, well, half of my anxieties and problems are only based on this erroneous belief. So again, that's what they're speaking about when they refer to non-duality, and also consciousness. When you hear that consciousness is the source of all things, that actually is a bad translation. Originally, what they meant was inner consciousness. And the consciousness of inner consciousness is actually what I refer to as the conscious death, basically. It's what they try to get in samadhi. And again, it's more potent. This is what you need to understand, that life is impotent. This is why it eats itself. All these disjointed, deficient parts have to keep consuming each other because they're impotent. Non-being or not non-being is potent forever and ever. And so that condition of pure and eternal potency, again, can be referred to as chaos. There's no sense perception. Sense perception is a limitation, a contraction. You are limited to your environment. You can't even leave your city most of the time because you're limited by your body and your need for money and food, etc. You can't even leave your small home, which is really, if you ever looked at a home, just the average size home, being built when they lay the foundation. If you really take a look at the slab, it's just this little confined space for a creature. It's really nothing. You're confined. You can't even get past that. So again, your condition is inauspicious and impotent. You have to keep eating and excreting, and you have to keep reproducing because you keep dying. So that chaos being more potent would actually be conceived as violent to this place. In a sense, it is destructive. And it's not selfishly destructive. That's the difference. It doesn't discriminate. Basically, everything gets destroyed. That corresponds to that the insight into the irreality, the Maya. That's a way of intellectually, philosophically, consciously using your ruthless intellect and cognition to destroy, in quotes, the world. That's how you break apart the illusion. So there is an element of violence to it, naturally, you could say, because, again, this is an act of violence and you sustain yourself by violence. So it would be hypocritical of you to condemn it based on those grounds alone. Again, the point or the difference would be me going out killing somebody is a selfish act of violence. But if, as they say, the world were to dissolve in a blink of an eye, that would be a selfless act of violence. And that's what they talk about in the Bible. That would be the primordial retaking the whole world system or existence. Now, am I proposing that's going to happen one day? Possibly. I don't know. I don't know how it could happen. Don't ask me. But that's how it would be. It wouldn't literally be these beings coming here to kill individually each human. That's inefficient. You would have to take out the whole thing. I mean, because if you really think about it, you don't have to kill all the humans. You would just kill all the animals they eat and they would die. But if you killed all the animals and the humans died, you'll still have foliage and insects. And then you have to see, it would have to be that twinkling of an eye that they talk about in the Bible. And that would be the return to the original condition. But again, that would be an act of violence. If you really think about it, you're destroying the whole world. That would be selfless. So there's a difference in that. But again, because it's more potent and this life, what you call life, it's a death state. It's not as potent as the original condition. So again, the original condition is considered to be auspicious. This is considered to be a violent disruption in the potency of chaos and to be looked at as such and regarded as wholly unworthy of serious consideration. Peace.